Hello and welcome to another Nserve video. I have been wanting to do a quick video on the results of the Las Vegas gunman's brain exam. So I will. And behold, here it is. Las Vegas gunman's brain exam only deepens mystery of his actions. Stephen Paddock, the 64-year-old gunman who killed 58 concertgoers in Las Vegas last October in the worst mass shooting in modern American history, had not had a stroke, brain tumor or a number of other neurological disorders that might have helped explain his actions, a recent autopsy and examination of the remains of his brain showed. Mr. Paddock's brain did have changes commonly seen in Americans of his age, including evidence of atherosclerosis, fatty plaques inside blood vessels that can impair circulation, which brain cells rely on to survive, and damage to the brain's blood vessels resulting from high blood pressure. Also, scattered on the surfaces of his brain were an abnormally high number of tiny deposits that tend to increase with age and accompany some neurological diseases. The brain examination was conducted by Dr. Han Vogel, the director of neuropathology at Stanford University. Dr. Vogel said he was able to perform an adequate evaluation, despite damage caused by Mr. Paddock's fatal, self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. With a good deal of screening, I didn't see anything, he said, that could explain why Mr. Paddock became a calculating mass killer. Although experts had considered it unlikely that a brain examination would provide answers to what led Mr. Paddock to commit a mass shooting, doctors throughout the country had proposed ruling out more than a half-dozen disorders that might possibly be implicated. Dr. Vogel found none of them. There was no evidence of frontotemporal lobar degeneration, which affects executive functions, including decision-making and social interactions, and can cause personality changes and unrestrained behavior. That disease would likely have been inconsistent with someone able to engage in meticulous planning. Mr. Paddock had complained to friends of feeling ill, in pain and fatigued, according to a preliminary report on the police investigation released last month. Mr. Paddock's girlfriend, Marilyn Danley, told investigators that he had grown more distant over the year before the shooting. The law enforcement report described Mr. Paddock as germophobic and strongly reactive to smells. A primary care physician in Las Vegas, who said he had been Mr. Paddock's doctor since 2009 and had last seen him as a patient roughly a year before the shooting, told officials that he suspected Mr. Paddock had bipolar disorder. That psychological disorder, however, cannot be identified in a typical post-mortem examination of brain structures. And while some studies have shown that people with bipolar disorder are more likely to have a history of violent behavior than the general public, the majority of them do not, and the relationship between mental health and violence involves many other factors. The doctor, who was not named in the report, also described Mr. Paddock as having behaved oddly, showing little emotion and expressing fear of medications. Mr. Paddock had refused prescriptions for antidepressants, but the physician had prescribed anti-anxiety medicine for him. A toxicology report showed he did have anti-anxiety medication in his system, based on a test of his urine. It was no longer detectable in his blood, meaning it was not active. The autopsy, performed by the Clark County coroner, and its related reports were obtained by the New York Times on Friday, and were first reported on by the Las Vegas Review-Journal, which had gone to court with the Associated Press to secure release. The examination showed that certain sections of Mr. Paddock's brain contained small spheres that can be seen when the tissue is treated with a stain. The structures, made up mostly of carbohydrates but also containing proteins and other components, are known as corpora amylacea. They studied parts of his hippocampus, involved in learning and memory, and the frontal lobes, among other areas. Most people would have them at that age, but not in that profusion, Dr. Vogel said. It's a striking exaggeration of an age-related finding. The cause and meaning of the structures remain mysterious, the subject of ongoing research. They appear as people grow older and are found at greater density in the brains of patients with Alzheimer's disease, multiple sclerosis and epilepsy. among other disorders. Dr. Vogel searched for signs of those diseases, but he did not detect them in Mr. Paddock's brain. 3 scientists who study corpora mylaceus said in interviews that the increased presence of the structures was significant. If you have high numbers of these, something's not normal, said Troy Ron, a professor of biology at Boise State University. Other scientists believe the structures are akin to waste baskets that contain remnants of broken-down cells or even infectious or hazardous substances. Dr. Hyman Zipper, a professor of neurology at McGill University in Montreal, said his laboratory's studies have found evidence that corpora amylacea can result from the damage caused by unstable molecules known as free radicals, which can be unleashed by various stressors. It's telling you something and it could be very important, Dr. Zipper said of the finding in Mr. Paddock's brain. Even so, Dr. Vogel, the Stanford neuropathologist, said the results of his examination should reassure public that Mr. Paddock's doctors had not misdiagnosing a tumor or other major brain disorder that could have been treated. The Clark County Coroner's Office had sent 129 brains to Stanford for examination before Mr. Paddock's. Typically they arrive by FedEx, but with heavy public interest in Mr. Paddock's case, the coroner, John Freudenberg, hand-delivered the brain, and Dr. Vogel has been asked to return it in person. Eric Paddock, the gunman's brother, who also received a copy of the reports, said they did not provide answers to the fundamental question of what drove his brother to his deadly actions. Still, he said, "I'm glad to have this closed out." There, you have it, an 8-minute video describing the gunman's brain and autopsy examination. Stephen Paddock was good with numbers. His brain was wired that way for many years as he worked as an accountant, and also had his fingers in the pie with real estate. He must have occasionally won at the casinos, as putting $10,000 a day into the system must return sooner or later. I mean, one day he may have won. But gamblers never talk too much about the losses, which must have been thousands upon thousands into the casinos. I really think that he simply just had enough. He was aging, and always in pain, as he clearly stated to friends and family. I can see his anger inside, just ready to pop and unleash his suicide mission plan. He just had to find a very crowded venue where people are packed in shoulder to shoulder in a paying venue that has fencing around the outside to stop unpaying clients from entering. He knew that when he started shooting, from that distance, he needed bunched crowds, as hitting individuals with that weapon spitting out 3 rounds per second, from a bump stock, would not be very accurate at all. So hit and miss, he aimed for the bunched up people. I mean, what are you really going to hit with the vibrating bump stock action spraying 3 rounds per second from here? I would say he was not discriminating against anyone. Wouldn't you?
Yeah.
There's no one moving down there, guys.
That's exactly where we were, too.
There's people laying in there. Look, there's people. Hey, there's people laying there.
Do you guys hear the gunshots just went off?
Look at the people laying there.
Oh my god.
I know people down there.
No, they're gone, Wendy. They left.
Not worried.
Holy shit.
Listen to that.
That's a
What the fuck is that?
That's
That's a
gunfire.
machine gun.
That's gunfire.
Wait, no, wait.
Where the fuck are they
I'm okay.